Okay, I would like to call to order the Architectural Review Panel meeting of February 24th, 2023. We have one item on the agenda. And the first thing I'd like to do is roll call. So just state your name. Will Shepard, present.
Camille Margadichin, present.
Alan DeBach, present.
Shada Maradi, present.
Thank you.
Kulkarni, present.
Oh, great. Good that you're here, Supriya. The first item is the consent item, the approval of last meeting's minutes. You've all been sent those, and you've had a chance to review those. Are there any comments regarding the minutes? Anything we need to correct? Hearing none, is there a motion to accept the minutes as written?
Motion to accept them as written.
Do we have a second?
I'll second it, Camille.
All those in favor of accepting the minutes as written, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? None? The minutes are accepted as written. Second item I would like to do is public commentary on this file, which will be SPR 2022-011. This, a little bit of a preface here. The Architectural Review Panel is a volunteer committee of professionals whose task it is to review the proposed projects for their architectural merits, for their color, texture, massing, arrangements, things that relate to building and city making. This is not a policy panel, nor this is a panel that can affect any type of city approval process. This is merely a suggestive panel that assists the city in keeping Calabasas beautiful. So with that in mind, I would like to open it to public discussion. And if you have a comment, we welcome all comments. I would ask that you keep your comment to 1 minute in duration and keep the content of your commentary, whatever it might be, to the notion of architectural issues related to this building. So, Jacqueline, do we have any people in the audience who would like to speak?
I see one hand raised so far, 2 hands raised. Do you want me to enable the first person to speak?
Chair, do we do 1 minute timer or 3 minutes?
How many?
We have a total of 51 attendees in public. Now only 3 persons raise hands.
51. So far, we have 3 hands raised.
Okay.
Okay,
So with only 3 hands raised, we can probably do 3 minutes, but
yeah.
we might have to curtail that back down to a lesser time if additional people want to speak. So for those in the public audience,
we have 5 hands now. Sorry to interrupt.
this is your chance to comment. Again, please make it architectural and limit your comments. If you hear something that's been commented before, no reason to say it again. Just say you might, agree or whatever, disagree, but make your comments unique and make them helpful as possible to the idea that we're reviewing this project architecturally. And I appreciate your input. So Jacqueline, I will just let you pick the person and set the time, I suppose.
All right, I'm going to enable the first speaker to talk. I'm just going in the order that the hands have popped up here. So Bill Davis, I'm going to go ahead and allow you to talk. You're going to have to unmute yourself and then you can speak.
I have some comments, but it regards parking. Does that fall under the purview of the Architectural Review Board? Hearing none, I guess it does.
Well, actually, Chair, if you want me to step in, I'm happy to assist that.
Please.
The parking is more of a zoning related issue. So to the extent that like landscape parking might have an issue with architecture, that's something, but really, again, the purview for this panel is to review the architecture and the design of the project. Parking is specifically a zoning related issue.
Okay, well, my question is, as I read the municipal parking code, the information that was presented by Cruzon, they are not even close to meeting the code requirements, and the impact on the civic center in general is going to be dramatic if that building goes in. Can I address those questions?
Again, the preference is for the comments to be related to architecture and design. If those have an impact on the senior center or the civic center, then that would be relevant.
Okay, I'm going to do that. Then I'll try. I've lost a minute. Let me go quickly. As I understand the project, the new structure will eliminate 112 of 100. Oh, he started again. Okay. On February 8th, 2023, I attended a briefing from Cruzon developers regarding the proposed residential structure to be constructed in a major portion of the current Civic Center parking lot. 130 plus Calabasas and other local residents came out for the evening presentation and Q&A session. As I understand the project, the new structure will eliminate 112 of 184 current parking spaces. Simple math says that will leave 72 parking spaces that can be utilized by the entire Civic Center complex. The project will add 107 new year residential units plus a cafe. Tentatively, there'll be 41 one-bedroom units, 58 two-bedroom units, and 8 studio units. Calabasas Municipal Code requires 1.5 parking spaces for each one-bedroom unit, 2 for each two-bedroom unit, and 1 for each studio unit. Municipal Code also requires 1 guest parking space for each 3 units. Additionally, I understand there'll be 20 commercial units, commercial designated parking spaces for the proposed cafe. This is a total of 220 parking spaces required by municipal code and the new structure. I think that the actual need will be greater than that. This does not include also a bicycle parking space requirement of 1 per unit. And I don't know what the current and future electric vehicle charging station requirements are going to be. Based on these code requirements and the proposed unit distribution, it would require at least 220 parking spaces. As presented on February 8th, 176 spaces are proposed, and any spillover parking will certainly go into the Civic Center parking spaces. As best I can determine, there'll be 72 on-site parking spaces for approximately 80 to 100 full-time city employees and at least 22 part-time employees. This is much less than the municipal code requires and does not allow for any library, founders hall, city hall business visitors, or senior parking. These proposed 72 remaining parking spaces are just woefully inadequate for and will not meet municipal code requirements, even if city employee parking is moved off-site. 19% of our adults in Calabasas are over 65. Some have mobility issues and some require handicap parking spaces. This does not even count the number of younger Calabasas citizens and citizens from our neighboring community who access our library and national award winning facilities and services. And also, I'm not sure about the increased requirements for electrical vehicle stations. In summary, I believe that because of the parking space, if the project proceeds, it will have a dramatic negative effect on the quality of life employed on our Civic Center campus. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you for those comments, Bill. For the rest of the people watching, again, the focus here is specifically architecture and design. Parking is a zoning related issue that will be handled at the Planning Commission stage, not at the ARP stage.
Okay, thank you, Bill. Jacqueline, the next comment, please.
I'm going to go ahead and mute Bill and then allow the next person. Rhoda, I'll allow you to talk. You just have to unmute yourself.
Yes, I'm very concerned with the parking within the structure that's going to be shared. Supposedly, the only elevator is very far away from the exit. There is one entrance and exit. They're not being controlled. They're going to need 24/7 access. If this is built to the minimum parking size and minimum row size, some of our seniors are gonna have trouble, and other people are going to have trouble parking. There are innumerable, if you look at just how the parking is laid out, I think it's going to be very difficult. You're gonna have seniors who walk much slower than the average person, toting art carts and yoga things. And it's not clear how they can safely exit and enter the parking lot when they're walking, when they come in later at night and it's dark in the winter. Having an elevator on the other side of the building is craziness. I'm not sure if this covers architecture, but your choice of architecture drives the amount of time the parking lot will be unavailable. And they were talking about bedrock and problems like that. If they go down too deep, I'm concerned that it will be at least 2 years that the parking lot, their parking structure will not be available. There may be some ways of building it such that it could reduce the amount of time that the parking lot, the few remaining parking spaces are available. Thank you very much. And also, the architecture does not match the mission style of the environment. I thought it was particularly modern. It might be beautiful somewhere else. It certainly, you would never think it was a Calabasas community. And I was very disappointed when I saw that architecture just looked cheap. Thank you.
Thank you, Rhoda. Jacqueline, may we have the next comment?
Yes, I'm going to go ahead and mute Rhoda, and then Pat Serenow, I'll allow you to speak.
Thank you. Well, I'm here to speak about health and safety concerns regarding the construction phase of the project. There's only one driveway going in. All the trucks, cement trucks, delivery trucks have to go in there. If a senior is lucky enough to find a parking place, now they have to negotiate. They're walking up that same driveway with trucks for 2+ years. You've got people coming in with canes, walkers, wheelchairs. This is a really unsafe situation, and I think the architecture has to do with that. If there's only one access road into this whole place. The other part is probably not quite architecture, but the noise pollution. They're going to be jackhammering for years to get down 18 feet, they said at the other meeting. 18 feet to jackhammer next to the library, the senior center. I mean, this is it'll make it almost uninhabitable for us to be in that vicinity. And I'm just wondering if these kind of working conditions are going to pass OSHA. That seems very unsafe and unhealthy to me. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I'm going to allow the next person to speak.
Hi, David Hurwitz. This is really quick and it's architectural. Aside from the effect on the senior center, which is profound and we'll be discussing a lot more, I hope, in the future, it seems to me that if you live in that building, the one elevator out front is going to be very inaccessible if a disabled or mobility impaired person has to park in the back of the parking lot. And that was brought up at the last meeting with Cruzan. They might even be in violation of the ADA because I think that building probably needs a rear elevator. That's all I have to say.
Okay. Thank you, David.
Okay, the next person I'll allow to speak is Joanne Suara.
This is Joanne's husband, John, and I guess looking at the buildings and the architecture of those buildings and comparing it with the architecture of the Civic Center and the style of the Civic Center, it does not seem to match. It's two different styles. You've got these high buildings that tower over the area, and the whole atmosphere of the Civic Center is one that is of a flatter, more spread out kind of thing. Then the other thing that concerns me is the construction. That when the construction happens, where are people going to park? And then I'm not speaking of parking. That's another consideration, I think, for the employees of the city. Is where are they going to park? And they're going to be parking down somewhere and having a hike. It's so I think there's a lot of things about this project is that it's not suited for the property. It's too big, and it's too high, and the architecture is not appropriate, and nor does it match the surroundings. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John.
Okay, I'm going to allow the next person to speak.
How many additional people been added to the list?
We have 4 more. So Lois Julian, I'll allow you to speak.
Hi, this is Charlotte Meyer. I had to run across the street. My computer, I guess the rain or something is not working there. So I'm on a different computer. First, I'd like to thank the panel because you are volunteers and your work and dedication to the city is really acknowledged and appreciated, even though today you're getting hammered a little bit. I'd like to start by saying overregulation by the state of California is something we all have to live with. But the urgency to build 21 affordable apartments at the expense of usurping a parking lot that serves access to the Calabasas Civic Center, its library, its city hall, and its senior center is not in the spirit of these laws. In fact, the opposite is true. Overregulation was mainly to help developers fast-track their projects, not destroy everything in its path. Today, I urge the ARP to approach their mission today without the feeling their comments and opinions need to be cautious or censored by these regulations. If it's not okay to build an apartment building without a tile roof in the community where every building has one, then say so. If it's not okay to build a building with no setback comparable to others on the same street, please say so. If it's not okay to question the number of parking spaces is adequate for the building's own tenants, their guests, or its 1,600 square foot cafe, please say so. And for safety reasons, if it's not okay to build a 5-story apartment building with over 100 tenants with only one elevator, please say so and acknowledge the many times our residents have had to be evacuated because of fires that most recently destroyed 9 homes. The residents are trusting our staff to boldly represent our city with a firm hand. In conclusion, also, under no circumstances should the staff encourage exceptions, variances, easements, or conditional use permits until this parking mess is resolved. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. On to the next one, please, Jacqueline.
Great. Thank you. We have Mel Mitchell.
Hi, my name is Mel Mitchell. We moved into Calabasas about 4 years ago, when honestly the first thing we did was join the senior center because it's such an outstanding place for the community and the seniors in the community. I attended the meeting a week or so ago and heard the presentation by Kurzan, and I was very concerned about the project as a whole and the design of the complex that they're building. Architecturally, it just doesn't seem to fit the style of Calabasas. And I think what concerns me, and you're hearing this a lot from other people, is that there is one parking lot underground that has 2 stories, and it has one entrance and one exit. And it's going to support 107 units in total, as well as the other aspects of the city hall, founders hall, the library, and the senior center. And honestly, if I were a renter going into that facility, the Curzon people said it would be like 5,000 a month, maybe 10,000 a month. I would demand to have a parking space as part of my rent. I don't know how they're going to get away with that. And it just doesn't fit the community. It just doesn't seem like a good project. I was an election worker this year. I was at the primary and the general election, and it was pretty busy for the 10 days I was there. Election day, there were over 2,000 ballots that were submitted through our Founders Hall site. And I just don't know how we would ever be able to handle that volume with the parking issues that are being created by this new project. So I don't think it's a good project. I just think it's a bad project for the community. Thank you.
Thank you, Mel.
Thank you. Okay, next we have Joe Chilko.
Hi, thank you. I'm Joe Chilko. I'm a longtime Calabasas resident. I think the important points that you need to focus on is the fact that this many people showed up and they have no idea how the city works, but they want to be heard, should be an indication that all aspects of the process need to take into consideration how important it is to the residents. Now, I know that the ARP is just a recommending body, and you recommend things to the Planning Commission. I also know that in public comments, you don't respond to them immediately. But I think the 3 important points that have been made that are within the purview of the Architectural Review Panel is access to the building. Someone pointed out that there's currently only one. I heard the developer say there's probably going to be 2. I don't know where that's going to be, but that's important. The elevator issue is certainly important to people. And yes, having one at each end of the buildings so that something is closer to the senior center is a good idea. And the other problem is the style itself. Yeah, it's a nice looking building. Technically, they can go as high as 5 stories if they like. We know that. But yeah, it's got to fit with the rest of the architecture in the area, and currently it doesn't. So I would hope that what people are going to come away with from today's meeting is, will you make these suggestions to the Planning Commission in your recommendation to them on these particular points? And I know you can't respond, so I'm just going to leave it at that with that question. We're all hoping that you do. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you. I'll go ahead and unmute the next speaker, Ron Steffen. Ron, you may have to unmute yourself. Will, would you like me to move on to the?
Yeah, how many more people raised their hands since the start?
We have 2 hands raised now, including Ron. So we can move on to Judith and then maybe come back to Ron.
Okay, let's do that. Let's let those be the last 2. They've had a half an hour to raise their hand, and then we need to move on to the staff presentation.
Okay, I'm going to allow Judith to talk. Judith, you're also going to need to unmute yourself so that we can hear you. I don't have any other speakers other than Judith and Ron. Doesn't
Okay.
look like either of them are able to speak. Oh, I have one more hand up. So I'll go ahead and two more hands up. Okay, so I'll go ahead and unmute the next person, Robert Jacobs. I'll allow you to talk.
Hi there. My name is Robert Jacobs. I'm an architect and have been for many years. And I've been through this process before. I just want you to know that the buildings are proposed to be 5 stories high, are going to be overshadowing the city hall. They're going to be tremendously tall and they're very narrow. And their tunnel effect will be a tremendous disservice to the city. The parking problems are unwieldy. They're tremendously overburdened as proposed. I think that you have to get into it. The streets are too narrow and the access is too narrow. I just want you to know that the width of the buildings are so narrow, there'll be a tunnel effect in there in addition to these buildings. The parking problems, I've been at the hearing on the 8th, and I believe that they are unresolved. I think they have to be resolved before the Civic Center and the library and the senior center will be affected. This will take 3-4 years before it be built. It will be tremendously detrimental to the city. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Robert.
Great, well, we have two more hands.
Are they the same hands that weren't available last time?
We have a Carol Steffen, which is the same last name as the previous person that was unable to speak.
Okay. Let's make this the last comment and then we'll be on to the staff report.
We do have one more speaker afterwards that hasn't, yeah.
Is that a
one
new
more
name
speaker.
or is that a new name or?
We have one more new name after Carol.
Okay, all right, that's it. 2 more and then we need to get to the staff report.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I actually am on for Ron so he could speak.
Yeah, this is Ron Steffen. I just wanted to join the chorus of those who admonish the design style of the building. I think it's overwhelmingly large. It'll be the largest building in the area. It overwhelms City Hall. It overwhelms the adjacent office buildings. And I think it's totally inappropriate. I don't know where we're forced or not forced to by the state to accommodate the developer on these aspects of it. The only other comment that I want to make, which is not relative to the Architectural Review Committee, is that I was kind of shocked to find out that the parking lot didn't belong to the city. It's been sitting there all these years and we've been using it. I think the best use of the property would probably be to turn it into a 2-level parking lot because we need more parking for the city. The city's going to grow and there won't be any place for people to come and visit the city center, the civic center, and the library, et cetera, unless we have adequate parking. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, and then we have Lotsie Burgers, the last person with their hand up.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. What worries about the design of the building, it doesn't matter to us as the citizens of Calabasas. What is important for us that we know that if you have a building with 100, 110 units, this building needs at least 300 or maybe more parking spaces because every house has a husband and wife, maybe a child, a guest, visitor, sometimes maintenance people. So you have to have at least 300 parking space. So what is going to be a disaster for this area is going to be worse than downtown because every evening when the people come home for work, It's going to be 300 cars in this little cul-de-sac, in this little street by the city, by the library. This is 300 cars without a parking. So if somebody wants to go to the city hall or to the library, it's no way, because this area is going to be packed. It's going to be worse than in downtown or worse than anywhere else. And that's why I feel that to put a building like this, 100 units with 100 parking spaces, traffic and parking, this is going to be a disaster, and it's going to ruin our beautiful neighborhood. And that's why I say no. And probably most of the people, my neighbors, they said, no, this is not a place for a big building like this, and we can do everything we can so to find another solution so they would not build a disastrous project like this. That's all.
Thank you, Mr. Berger.
Thank you. And we do still have Judith's hand raised, who had to speak earlier. Would you like me to try to allow her to talk one more time?
Sure. Why don't we finish this off?
Okay. Judith, are you there? Okay, it doesn't look like she's able to speak. I can go ahead and lower her hand. If that's what you'd like.
Yeah, let's go ahead. Thank you, members of the public, for your commentary and your interest in keeping Calabasas beautiful and everything for everyone's lives and homes. I would like to close the public commentary and ask that planning staff provide us a report of the project as normally customary. And from there, we can have the panelists comment. I'd like to start the comments and then have all the panelists weigh in as they feel appropriate.
Okay, thank you, Will.
Oh, and sorry, Jacqueline, at some point, can you on another browser, can you bring up a Google view of that district, including a fairly large map that we could look at, a satellite image that we can also make some marks on using Zoom?
Yeah, let me do that right now. Give me one moment.
Thank you. And while Jacqueline's bringing that up, I do want to make sure that the public is aware that if you were unable to make a comment today or didn't get your hand up in time, you can always email staff. Jacqueline and Glenn's email should be on the agenda. You could also email myself as well, Michael Klein. And if this project gets continued by the ARP, then any comments that come in between now and when the agenda goes out, we'll be sure to include those comments to the ARP.
All right, I'm going to keep my comments today pretty brief, so I'm just going to give a quick description of the project, and then I can bring up that map that you had mentioned, Will. We do have the applicant's entire architectural team here today, and I know they have a couple of things to say about their chosen design, so I'm just going to keep it to a brief project description, and I'll let them get into more details of the design that they're proposing. So with that, I'll just get into the description of the proposed project. This is a request for a site plan review permit to construct a 60-foot, 6-inch tall, 118,495 square foot mixed-use building titled the Park Apartments. The project is inclusive of a 1,600 square foot commercial space, which is a counter service restaurant, 107 residential units, 26% of which will be designated affordable. The project site is located at 24100 Park Sorrento, which is currently utilized as a parking lot for the Civic Center complex, but it also does serve as a shared public parking lot for all uses within the Park Center master plan area. The site is located within the commercial mixed-use zoning district, and it's also within the city's affordable housing overlay zone. With that, let me go ahead and bring up the map that you just mentioned first, Will, and then we can take a look at this first and then go into the plans. All right, can everyone see my screen? Okay. So I'll just talk a little bit about the project location first, and then I'm going to flow through the plans really quick, and then I'll turn it over to the applicant's architect to talk a little bit about their design, if that's okay. So this is the proposed project location. As you can see, this is located off of Park Sorrento. As we've heard already, it's obviously directly next to the Civic Center complex, across the street from the office buildings located on Park Sorrento, and then surrounded by the Hilton Garden Inn on the other side. As mentioned, it is in the commercial mixed use zoning district and the affordable housing overlay zone. Then I'm just going to pull up the plans. Again, I'll just keep it brief, keep my comments to what they're proposing. It's a rendering of the project. So you can see the applicant is proposing to have ground floor commercial right here, along with parking on the ground floor, and then one level of underground parking below that. Then we have 4 levels of residential units located above that. Just briefly going to go through. This is our site plan. You can see City Hall to the east in this image right here, Hilton Garden Inn Hotel to the west in this image. And then we have 4 stories residential over 2 levels of subterranean parking with this central courtyard. As Michael had already touched upon, the review today is limited to architecture and design, so I'm not going to go through the parking related issues since those are zoning issues and not architecture and design related issues. Okay, and I'm just going to skip right through to the elevation since I think the architect will have some things to say about the remainder of the sheets. Here we have the elevations for the proposed project. This is the project as viewed from the street along Park Sorrento. As you can see, we do have, try to zoom in on this a little bit more. This is their first level in which the commercial area will be located. We have a counter service restaurant right here, and then the 4 levels of residential units located above that. This is as viewed from Park Sorrento. Then we have the east elevation as viewed from City Hall. You can see the entrance to the parking garage right there, along with this commercial component that does jut out a little bit farther right there. The south elevation. And then we have the west elevation as viewed from the other side of the building from the Hilton Garden Inn Hotel. And then these are interior elevations, so the courtyard from the inside. And this is their rendering view from Park Sorrento. And I believe they also have, you can pull it up. They have 1, 5, and 10-year vegetated renderings. So let me just show, this is their 10-year vegetated rendering. So again, as viewed from Park Sorrento, you can see those different levels that I mentioned earlier. And City Hall is just out of the image in the area where my cursor would be right here. We have their colors and materials board. So here you can see the multiple different colors of plaster that they'll have for the exterior. That terracotta color, the darkest color, will be the first floor. And then the smooth white plaster will be the majority of the building. And then this color in the middle here, this beige color, will be this top level right here. It's a little bit easier to see in the elevations than in the rendering. So let me just scroll back up to that really quick. Here you can see the mix of colors best in the elevations. Okay, we also do have their landscape plan. So I'll just toggle over and kind of scroll through that. Okay, I won't go through all of the very specific Latin names of the plants that they're proposing, but just briefly, here is their planting palette. So you can see they do have native shrub planting at the hillside, shrubs and ground cover, trees, and some of these will be planted along the hillside to the south of the building. And they do have various patios, courtyard areas that are going to be common areas within the building in which trees and shrubs will be planted as well. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen. Apologies if you can hear that rain in the background. It's coming down pretty hard out there right now. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen. Well, if you want, we can either have the panel members speak first, or we do have the applicant here, and I have a couple slides that they'd like to share. So we can have them speak first and share some words about their design.
Yes, let's let that happen. And if they could just keep it to their briefest I mean, they could talk for a long time, I know that, but please have them start.
Okay, I believe the person on the architect sign that's going to speak is Jonathan. I only see that we have one Jonathan here. Would you be able to raise your hand on the architect side if you're the one that's going to be delivering? Okay, we have Jonathan's hand raised. Let me go ahead and allow him to speak, and I will share my screen.
Good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me fine?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. I think my colleague, yes, Matej is going to put his screen on. Yeah, we'll speak very briefly because Jacqueline did a good job of describing it. Here's the context. And obviously there are hills around the site. And so it's kind of an interesting height question because the hotel actually and the office building are higher than the proposed apartment building. So Matej, if you could go to the next slide, please.
Sorry, I have control over the screen. So
oh, you do? Okay.
Yeah, just let me know when you want me to go to the next.
Yeah, thank you, Jacqueline. So we just want to show where the two views are that we'll show in a minute on the site plan. It just gives you a breakdown of the 107 units, of which, by the way, 21 are affordable, 16 low income and 5 very low income affordable units. And that's significant amount of affordable units for a project this size. You see the context, and we're trying to keep the building, we've divided it in two to keep the scale, similar to the surrounding buildings. And when you see the overhead, I think it probably is. The next slide just shows that there's been a lot of comments. Obviously, I presented the other evening at the senior center, and we got a lot of valuable feedback that we're looking into, but there are 2 parking pedestrian entries and therefore 2 parking pedestrian exits to go across the road to the sidewalk against City Hall, just like you would walk if you're walking from the current parking lot to the senior center or the library. And they are fully handicap accessible. We're actually required by code, of course, to make that so. And the parking lot itself is fully handicap accessible and has the requisite number of handicap parking spaces. But you'll see through on this overhead how much green space there is on the piece of land that our client owns and where the parking vehicular entry is. And, we do a lot of apartment buildings, and this size entry and its location is perfectly normal for 150 parking spaces. There will be very few queues or congestion at that entrance. There are also parking spaces, 16 of them on the exit, on the outside of the building for convenience. Next slide, please, Jacqueline. So we thought we'd get right to the architecture because that's what this hearing is really all about. And obviously we understand that Calabasas is based in a Spanish style architecture. Actually, when I've driven all around the city and walked it, and there are a lot of different takes on Spanish style architecture, even within this vicinity with the hotel and the office building across the road. And we wanted to do something that wasn't trying to mimic City Hall or upstage it in any way. So it's kind of a quiet building. It also steps back from the street front. And so you see, as Jacqueline said, the ground floor, which disappears into the hillside and becomes parking, is this sort of Santa Barbara plaster finish in a terracotta color. And it's a very sort of warm color. It'll be divided light windows to sort of reflect the traditional Spanish style divided light windows, and a really nice corner plaza where people who are visiting all the Civic Center can come and get a cup of coffee and hang out, a brick wall along the front to have that sort of warmth when you're walking by. We paid a lot of attention, and Scott, the landscape architect, is on the line, and we'll walk you through very briefly the landscape in a minute, but this pedestrian experience is obviously important. But you can see from the massing and the building, the breakdown and the colors, we have these screens in the windows which change as they go up, and then the beige is in the most setback portions. And I'll show you a section in a minute. Next slide, please. This is looking from the senior center down, and you see the new crosswalks and the well-lit parking entrance and exit so that somebody can park close to the senior center on that ground floor parking, and exit and come across the road safely on a marked crosswalk. Also, the building has, as you said, Jacqueline, it shows more maybe in the elevation, but 2 different colors on the recesses, and then a couple of trellises on the top, and again, landscaping on the building. And if you look over to the left, we've taken the top floor off of the west wing so that we can get more light down into the pool and into the courtyard and provide some variation on that rather nice hillside that we imagine, you know, is a nice outlook and people go walking on it, even though it's very steep. Next slide, please. So these were the sections, and if you look at the right-hand end, you'll see how they're slightly different. So one is cut through the west side of the front, on the right there against Park Sorrento. One is cut in the middle, and you'll see in the middle there's a grand stair that goes up, and we're trying to get connectivity to the street and make this feel like it's a open project. And then there's a really nice paseo back into the building for the residents to use, so you don't have to use the elevator. You can come off the courtyard and come down onto the street. And then you'll see the step backs going back, significant step backs at most levels and different volumes to try and break the building up to make it more contextual on the street. Next slide. So you've already shown the elevations, but I think the significance is the change in color, the amount of trellis work to try and break up and create really nice shadows and a place for bougainvillea to grow, the landscape in on all the levels. And we're compliant with the height as determined by the state density bonus code, which is the law that prevails for the height. And so we're within the height restrictions imposed by that density bonus code. Next slide. And of course, the entrance nearest the City Hall is the highest part of the building. And so the 60'6" that was mentioned is correct, but that's at the very tallest part of the building. At the rear, on one side, it goes right down to about 35 feet. So it has a changing relationship to the existing grade. Next slide, please. These are the 2 sides. This is the east side facing City Hall. You see the parking entrance there, and the compliance with the height and the different colors and the breakup with balconies and railings. And this provides a lot of eyes on the street, which is always good for security. One of the things we won't get into now, because I know you want to keep it short, but we've thought long and hard about the lighting. We have a lighting designer on board, and they're making sure that there is adequate light on the sidewalks, on the parking spaces, inside the building. And you know, that's been a big effort with the photometrics of the lighting to make sure there is good coverage all around the site. Next slide. And the final elevation on the west side facing the hotel. And you see the stepping and the amount of articulation on that left side, which is where the street comes into the building. And how far underneath the height limit we are. I mean, we could have gone up to that upper red line if we'd wanted to on this half of the building, but we are cognizant of the scale of the project. And so at this side, a lot of the elevation is only 35 or 42 feet above the adjacent grade. Next slide. So the materials you ran through quickly. I think nice to point out these screens that have the roots in Spanish style architecture and provide some shading and some privacy for the windows, but also provide some decoration and some, you know, sort of recognition of the Spanish style roots of the project. The metal trellis work, which will accommodate some really nice greenery, the different colors we're using, the brick, and the profile of the windows. One thing to note, by the way, the client has agreed to use all aluminum windows. And I know the architects on the panel know that these days, most multifamily goes to vinyl windows, and that's fine, but the aluminum ones really do look better. The color stays longer, and these are high quality windows. In fact, it's a high quality project throughout. Next slide, please, Jacqueline. I don't think we need to go back onto the site plan. This was just really to show where the loading is and how the parking works alongside the street. and how the easements work. One thing I will note, there's a dotted line down there, which is where we could have built to, and the building is another 14 feet back. So we've taken a further 14 feet setback that we weren't required by code to do in order to be able to provide this street side parking and just step a little further away from City Hall. Next slide. So the floor plans, I think, the only interesting thing really here is the front on the left-hand side, a lot of working with the grade to make the commercial, so rather the cafe space accessible with a nice patio outside, the lobby comes in. You see the bike parking there. I think one of the people mentioned bike parking. There is code required bike parking space on grade. Next slide. Typical floor plans, the courtyard plan that shows the step backs and then the different decks up on the top floor there on the left-hand side, and how the building steps back in the bottom left corner, the southwest corner, to allow sunlight in. Next slide. This is the start of the landscape presentation, and if Scott could raise his hand, there are only 3 slides. He'll just very high level walk you through the concept if you'd like him to.
Okay, I'm going to allow Scott to speak.
Okay, yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thanks, Jonathan and Jacqueline. Yeah, I'll just be really brief. So one thing, as Jonathan mentioned, one thing we paid careful attention to in the landscape design is the street frontage area. We wanted to sort of follow the terraced idea of the building as it sets back and kind of continue that down through the main entry stairs and along the sidewalk. So we thought carefully about the pedestrian experience. There's also, I'll show it in the plans, but there's a lot of sort of pause points where pedestrians can stop and sit and take a break. So the materials that we're showing here is just a general palette. The idea, to show the idea, we wanted to follow the Spanish style architecture and bring in sort of a rich palette of materials of varying types to kind of bring warmth and richness to the project. So yeah, Jacqueline, if you could go to the next slide. This is the site plan. The level 2 plan on the right shows the courtyard in the center of the building, which is built over the parking structure. One of you'll see that the paving areas are denoted in different textures, and those are going to be different types of inlaid tiles intermixed with some concrete paving. But we've kind of created sort of a hierarchy or a nodal system. As you pass through the center of the building, you have different nodes of interest to stop and experience. But it also allows you sort of a view through the site to see the different elements and beyond to the hillside beyond it. So we wanted to sort of integrate the experience of being in having the hills of Calabasas kind of, to be part of the project. Let's see, the trees, again, if you want to go to the next slide, I think the plant materials aren't shown here, but the plants in general are a Mediterranean palette, greens, foliage colors and textures, a mix of different ones, so that we wanted a kind of a soft leafy green and bluish feeling palette. We're of course adhering to the water efficient landscape ordinance. So it is a drought tolerant palette, but should be appropriate for the style of the building. And again, I think Jacqueline, you mentioned along the hillside where we do have construction renovation, we will replant the hillside with native plantings. But for the most part, we want to kind of keep the hillside in a natural state. And I think that's about all I have. So I can certainly answer questions.
Thank you, Scott. We might have questions as we go along, or the panelists might.
Great, I'll be here.
And thank you, Jonathan, for the high-level review of the project. I suppose I would like to start in the most general sense and talk about the project at a couple different scales. Jacqueline, can you turn back to that Google image? is the first significant infill project that I'll say I've seen in many years in Calabasas. And so in that sense, it has a known context that it's fitting into in terms of what it's next to, the topography, the language of the city architecturally. And so it has a lot of possibilities, if you will, to both be part of making the city and also an internally workable building. So if we were to talk about making the city, being part of the city, then I think that there's a big idea about what does the face of the building look like maybe on these two sides. Because that's the biggest kind of context that you might see as a resident of the city. So there's something about being contextual, I think, at least on two sides. And then you'd had a very good presentation. It was very succinct, very professional. But I think what's missing in your planning documents, and what would be probably very helpful to the public, is if you began to start taking cross-sections, large cross-sections through the whole site, so we can see how tall buildings are related to what you're proposing. What is the context of the city making with the building infill? You know, the old figure ground, if you will, of a planning era long gone by. Those kinds of arguments and ideas, I think, would inform your building and your massing of your building and the arrangement of the building on your site. So in that sense, my recommendation would be that this proposal step back a little bit and consider further how it might fit into the context of this city making. Because it's an important building, it's an important site, it's highly visible, it's the first major infill project of this area, and it needs to be done very skillfully, which I think is easily done by you guys, but there might be moves that haven't been considered before. So Jacqueline, can you turn to their site plan then?
Yes.
And I'm sorry that I have to annotate the screen, but it's kind of the only way I can talk is just draw, because also as an architect. So so back to the city making, the language of the building, maybe along these two sides, is really important, especially at the first and second level. What does it look like? What does it feel like to be walking by this building in relation to the other things that are around you? So in that sense, the massing, the articulation, the language, if you will, might be something that you would consider a little bit differently. The other thing is the proportion of some of these, of this courtyard. I see that you've pulled the building in as far as you can. I know that there's a zero lot line, but I wonder whether or not increasing this courtyard depth would be to your benefit. I mean, the units at the very lower level right around here are it's going to be pretty dark in that courtyard, I would think, for long portions of the year. And it would be nice that there's a equitable amount of daylight, if possible, for all the residents based on what level they're on. So I'm not sure if we could open up this courtyard a little bit. And again, thinking about courtyards as city amenities, you know, the old European sort of model of the plaza. How do we make this a plaza, or how do we make this a plaza as a public good? Because I think there's two things. You have to be a good building for yourself, your developer, the economics of it all, but you also have to contribute something to the city. And I think that the contribution right now is what's maybe missing, either in its intentional depiction or in its massing and development of form. So that's one internal building idea that, you know, could it crank out a little farther? Does it have to be so rectilinear? Are there moments, as you mentioned, that could begin to develop larger courtyards? I'm not sure. This is your task. But I think that right now, what I'm not seeing is city making at the kind of pedestrian level that's conversant with the building that you are developing also. Now, let me throw something out that should possibly cause you concern, but also possibly be an opportunity to talk about that city making further. Jacqueline, I need a site plan. Well, this is probably fine. So right here, this fire access, this is above the 2 stories of parking. Is there a way to offer back more parking, public parking, parking for the people to use the senior center, for the civic center, etc., inside this hill condition? I know that's a retaining wall. I know that back in the back line would be very tall, but if a 2-story, say, parking structure was built here that just had public access, again, it's an expensive proposition, but that's the kind of city making that I think is appropriate for a building of this scale to be approved in this venue. You're asking for a lot, and that's great, but what can you give back? And I wonder whether or not everything you've heard about parking and everything else, if there's an opportunity to do a couple levels of additional parking. And if you go to the section, Jacqueline, that goes through there, I think you can pull it off fairly easily.
You go down to the sections.
Yeah. And then go back to that view after we talk about this. So yeah, right there. Okay, so the section on the very top, two things I'm not super happy about is one, this condition. This is not city making. That set of steps, that 12-foot vertical rise of unbroken risers, to me, that just sounds like a toddler spinning all the way down to, I don't like that. I'd like that to be broken up and a little more grand, a little more of an idea about how what can you provide to the city face. But my idea about the parking structure, could that slip in right here? Could you put a number of cars in there? And of course, there's a retaining wall here. And then is this an amenity? Is this another level of parking? Maybe there's 3 levels. I don't know. You'd have to think about that. Does it have to sit back? Maybe it's not as far out, so you can stabilize the hillside. But something like that, I think, would be a grand gesture to the city making, which was my first idea. And then back, Jacqueline, if you could, and I won't get down into the weeds, I'd like the other panelists to talk to, but could you go to that one rendering on the front?
Yes. This one, right?
Yeah, any of those. So I appreciate I guess, the tonality of the color change and the textural ideas and the ideas of shade and shadow. I even kind of like your mashrabiyah a little bit, but to me, this is not reading Spanish Mediterranean. I don't see that. I see a very contemporary looking building with some pastiche, to use the wrong word, of elements that could somehow be thought of as in the language of Spanish Mediterranean. So that, to me, the building is a little too stark. It's a little too modern right now. And I think you could soften it up even further. But the first idea I had about city making is I just don't think this facade is working, because that is the sort of public, the public view. This is how, European cities work, right? It's always the sort of what's happening down here. And I think those are the opportunities to perhaps integrate some form and some building making that's a little more in keeping with the language of a Spanish style. Maybe there's arches, maybe there's tile. And then perhaps if your more modern building sets back from this base and is of a different language, then but cohesive with your base, then perhaps that's a way to do both. So to me, I like the proposal, but I think it could go further in offering something back to the city that is in the context of city making. plazas, spaces, parking, ground floor articulation, that's a little different. So I'm going to let my other panelists talk, and perhaps then after we all speak, you could respond to these comments. But that's kind of how I'd like to lift off. So any of the panelists who would like to speak first? Camille, would
I'll
you
go.
like to
Okay,
start?
sure. Well, thank you, Will, and thank you for the excellent presentation. You know, I'm going to concur with my colleague, Will. Of course, I don't see a Mediterranean aesthetic. I think there are little tiny elements of certainly beautiful tiles that were introduced in the landscape. They would unlikely create enough bang for their buck to really transform what the typical pedestrian walking by is going to see. I feel the same way. The mass at the parkway is just too tall. Honestly, the whole building is too tall, but I understand that you're allowed to build to a certain height, and of course you should. But I think we've missed the boat here. I just think there's nothing wrong with doing a modern solution. I don't think we should try to disguise it as something else. If we want to present to the community a modern solution, I think it's okay. But I think we still have to step back and be respectful of what's next door. And I'm sure you guys have spent a lot of time looking around. I mean, our community put a huge resources into, and a lot of love by our staff, into creating that civic center to appropriately reflect our community. I mean, they brought on Robert A.M. Stern, which was a big deal at the time, and to get an authentic Mediterranean. We aren't asking for Disneyland. The worst thing we could do is take this bold modern box and apply a bunch of decorative Mediterranean things. I think that would be a mistake. I think there is a chance possibly to combine. I didn't think of that, Will, till you just said it. You know, maybe there's two conversations happening in this building, but I don't think we should pretend that it's something else. So I looked back at, you know, KFA's website is beautiful. I've certainly seen your buildings. You guys do beautiful buildings. I think this one just, and I don't know the drivers, but I looked at several projects of yours that were modern but elegant. I looked at the Lincoln project you have going. There's one in Santa Monica. Again, remembering those all are city projects. We do not live in the city of Los Angeles or the city of Santa Monica. We live in Calabasas, and the community that will be using this and that will be living here is Hidden Hills, Calabasas. It's a very different aesthetic. And again, it doesn't mean it can't be modern, but I think in some of your modern buildings that are even in the city, they have articulations that tell you what's happening in the building up there. These are like storage spaces for people, apartment building, flat facade. Even if they're going back and forth, the screens are just simply applied. I don't feel them to be Mediterranean. I think the screen looks kind of mid-century to me. So I think there's a big thought that has to go into it. I don't think we've taken the right course here. I think there's some beautiful elements, as I said. I think if you're at the Civic Center, so much investment went into, if you're looking out onto this, you're looking, the base of it is a parking right up against a building, a tall building. And that's disappointing. I mean, our community is very clear about having landscape between our the nose of our cars and parking. I don't know, it's 5 feet or something. You know, there's a lot of little elements that don't seem important, but when you start to add them all up, they create the vocabulary of Calabasas, Hidden Hills, and the community, the very somewhat rural communities that are just, you know, stone's throw away from here. So I heard a lot. I'm trying to look at my notes that I heard. I wrote them down as our community was speaking. And I think their voice is actually way more important than ours, because you guys are a very talented firm. I have no doubt. I tried to see if you had anything that was traditional. I saw a Spanish Revival building that you could literally pick up and put here and it would work. I'm not saying to do that, but you in the website, you noted that the reason you picked that solution, it was so it would assimilate into the existing neighborhood. I think those are good words to use. And again, no one wants Disneyland, no one wants fake Mediterranean. There is a lot of that in our community and we try very hard to avoid it. I think Stern's building doesn't do that. And I do think there's a modern solution, but it has to be layered. It has to have high quality materials. Hopefully it's textural in what the site sees. I appreciate a beautiful courtyard, but I also think it may be too greedy to have that much of a courtyard. I know that's the opposite. Will was opening it up. I'm suggesting that we need to look at how to get more landscape and, you know, lower elements as you walk down that street. You see those little kids, they're literally walking to a wall that's 3 feet above their head. So I think there's a lot to look at here. Again, I have no doubt this firm has the skill and amazing design competence to do it themselves. I don't need to tell them the solution. But I really thought about, I'm just going to share a couple things. Is just so many wonderful community members came to speak, which I genuinely appreciate. I appreciate Scarlett's comments about making sure that we do our job, and several people who showed their concern that this is an important place for us. And it is, you know, there are communities that wouldn't even allow this type of building. And I know that because of the housing needs, and this is a great opportunity for a higher density housing, which our community needs and has to, you know, has to appreciate that it's going to be important for us, and to keep people being able to live here, because as people are getting older, we can't just have gigantic 12,000 square foot houses that they can't get anywhere. This is going to be beautiful. They'll be right next to the Civic Center and the Commons and everything, to be able to make a walking community. This building feels like it's in the city, and you're not connecting to our community. So I think that listen hard to what our community is saying, and honestly, please respect what the existing conditions are. I don't know, can I ask the staff, is this in the scenic corridor? Is it viewed at all from scenic corridor?
No, it's not within the
Completely
corridor
off,
from the
so
freeway.
we don't have to worry. There's big bright white walls, of which we typically don't even accept because of the scenic corridor. So we do want to blend into our adjacent beautiful landscape. And then I think just the diagram again from Will that I saw at the very end of his comments is Mediterranean architecture also has a hierarchy that I don't see. And he kind of drew it. I'm sure he was thinking it, but maybe even as he was writing it, is there's a front door, and we know, you know, we're greeted. There's not like this big facade that says you can't come in here, you know. So I know the little corners there, little coffee shop, but you've got Olive Commons. So I love the idea of a new little coffee shop, but doesn't feel quite connected to the street when you look at the height of those elevations. So anyway, that's my thoughts. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Camille. Who is ready to,
Hello,
Shada, would you like to?
Can I
Great.
continue? Yes, hi. Thank you very much. And I just want to continue to Will's comment. I think if you don't have any issue of the setback, maybe better to push the building further towards the back and have more landscaping, stairs, sitting area in the front, like how the city is having that area in the front, and also all those offices across the street, they have you know, some water features or sitting area, and it doesn't really is too close. This is really too close to the street. Maybe better you have a little area more for seating and you know, people that they're walking or using the cafeteria, or even they can come from the library. This is my comment.
Okay, thank you, Shada. Alan or Supriya?
Yeah, I would like to go next.
Okay.
I would like to continue in the same vein that Will and Camille did. This is a nice building, but I feel like it doesn't quite fit here. because the civic center is a vantage point for the city. It's a location that everybody goes to, everybody meets there, the senior center, the civic, the library. It's like a hub for the city, and how it looks, how it feels. This doesn't quite translate to that. The look of this, like as everybody else is saying, it is quite modern. The palette is not the same quite as that of the civic center. And even if it's a nice building, this location doesn't fit this location, doesn't fit this spot. So I think I would like to just say that I concur with Will and Camille, and maybe you can really look at this design and see how it could fit here. Because this, even if it's a nice building, it doesn't fit. That's the feeling that I get. That's it.
Thank you, Supriya. Alan, you're up.
I'm up. In the essence of time, I mean, I'll reiterate most of the panelists' comments. I do agree with the panelists that it's a great building. It's a nice building. I don't think it fits in the aesthetic and the architecture of the street, let alone Calabasas. I think I understand the modernist look of it, although with the parapet, probably to increase ceiling heights and get some more units without having any kind of gables or pitched roofs or anything else, maybe adding some tile roof to tie it in more with the community at large. I think it was a miss, to be honest. It just doesn't fit in the location where it is my opinion. And I'll reiterate the rest of the comments rather than reiterating them.
Thank you, Alan. Okay, Jacqueline, so those are probably our comments, and they're kind of a similar tenor, I suppose. I would like to give the applicant a chance to just briefly respond a little bit, and then we can figure out as a panel how we suggest that they move forward, because I don't believe we can recommend that they go to Planning Commission in its current state. Maybe other panelists can disagree, but it feels like this needs to iterate. And in my opinion, it needs to iterate in some pretty significant manner. It can't just be the application of materials and the Disneylandification and all of that was touched on. There's something fundamentally amiss here. And I get it. You're trying to put as many units as you can. There's an economy of scale and everything else. But my big point is that you need to consider the city making, the scale of the city in the next iteration that we see. And so, Jacqueline, why don't we let the applicant comment on that a little bit? Maybe there's something we haven't heard. And from there, let's think about how we formulate a plan forward.
Okay, yeah, I have all of your individual comments written down, so maybe we can let them respond, and then we'll get to a summary of comments that you all agree on.
I also had a quick question. Is this, does this rendering reflect the reality? Like, if you look at the plan, it looks like the building is surrounded from all sides. In this, there seems to be space in the front. Is that realistic, or is that just a rendering effect?
Do you mean space in the front?
Yeah, like the road. Is the road that wide? Is there?
I'm not sure about the width of the road, but as far as, and we can go back up to, actually, maybe the site plan that they had in their presentation is better to show the greenery between the buildings.
And to clarify, they are stepping back the building about 14 feet from their property line. So that would be from the sidewalk.
So I think this is kind of the view in that rendering is probably from about right here on Park Sorrento. So at the front right here, they do have that outdoor terrace for the restaurant. So what you're seeing is kind of this level first with this greenery there, then the terrace, then the restaurant area, and then the rest of the building steps back from there.
Okay.
So
okay, thank you.
That's the angle that it's from right there.
Thank you for the clarification.
I'm sorry, one more thing that, just trying to be picky, seems like the shadow is wrong, because, you know, in the rendering too, seems like it's from the north or west, the sun, the shadow line. Yeah, this is north facing facade.
Yeah,
think
that's a great point, Shada. And I think that was what I was trying to talk about that courtyard, that internal street. Even though it's landscaped beautifully, the proportion of it might be such that those lower units don't really see much light because the stories are so tall above and it's so narrow. Also internally, those hallways, those double loaded corridors, there's very little natural light that can enter those corridors. And that doesn't feel right. That feels,
I think we can let the applicant answer those. Jonathan, did you want to take that, or did you
Absolutely.
want to unmute?
Yes,
more
can I
members
add
of
one
the-
more thing just before we hop over to them? Because now that, I mean, the more I'm letting it soak in. We'll just mention the internal corridors, which I didn't mention, but I was concerned with, and even on a low income project and the whole thing was low income. We put our corridors to the outside and we definitely saved a great deal in terms of the internal square footage. But also we turned I think the circulation that Will was talking about, that it be a shared amenity, that courtyard, needs to even be brought to this side. You can see it's as though it's in an industrial park. The people are walking in the parking lot instead of on a path or having some type of connection to the landscape. So I think it's really important because that's something that in our community we've now tried to move away from. So this industrial park idea that you just walk through parking lots to get places. I love the idea that Will was talking about, where maybe that circulation becomes, more public. And then I'm just going to touch one last time. I know I'm repeating and I'm not supposed to, but we'll touch on something about putting a parking structure nestled into that hill, which did scare me at first, because I know that if someone said that, I'd go, oh, my budget. But at the same time, maybe amenities could go on top of it rather than even put top parking. Move the pool there, do something really creative so we can get the counts you need, but not overly create a bulky building. I think there's a way to get the units you need and use the property more effectively. Sorry, I'm done.
no, it's great. I love that idea of the amenity, because that hill, Michael, that was just designated as open space and people can walk through there. It's kind of hard to get to, but imagine.
It's very steep. No one's gonna walk.
Imagine
It's
a roof
impossible.
deck or a facility that allows you to
Right.
access that
Mhm.
from, which would be another great amenity. So here we
Right.
are redesigning projects for applicants, but let's let Jonathan, and adding big costs.
That's right.
Sorry, but we have to talk about broad strokes because this is the panel
Yeah.
we're in.
And one thing before Jonathan speaks, we included in the packet, in the ARP packet, the Calabasas Park Center Master Plan, which includes, it's actually the design guidelines for the Calabasas Park Center Master Plan area. And so that is something that we are bound by, and they have specific setback requirements for different levels of the building. So as this project continues to move forward in the process, I just want to make sure that the panel is aware of that document, and of course the various zoning regulations, or in terms of setbacks and height limit.
Okay, I'll try and respond. Can you hear me okay? Yep. Thank you for all the comments, very thoughtful. It's nice to be in front of a review board that really thinks about their town and looks at the architecture, and that's all the things that you're thinking about. Believe me, we've thought about, and to one degree or another. I think in order, the idea of parking on the very south side, that is a part of it is a protected open space. So we can't just go digging in there. Secondly, to put parking there, the retaining wall would be 50 or 60 feet. And most jurisdictions just don't allow retaining walls that high because they're so dangerous. But secondly, it's just cost prohibitive, unfortunately. Thirdly, we've got to have the fire lane there that's completely open to the sky and accessible 28 feet wide. So using that space, I mean, we'll look at it, see if there's some terracing we could do for an amenity, but I think adding additional parking back there would be very, very difficult and extremely expensive. I mean, you probably know, Will, I mean, those, when you have a retaining wall like that, we're getting up to sort of $50,000-$60,000 per space that's not required by the code. And that's a very hard, bitter pill to swallow. So that's one thing to think about. Secondly, I think this idea of the courtyard, if you could go to the site plan, I'm sorry that it looks like the rendering is done wrong, but it's actually not. It's actually a time of year when the sun comes that far round at sunset. We have all the programs that let you see that, and it comes past due west, as you probably know. And so that is actually a realistic shot at the equinox, just before sunset. This courtyard is 38 feet wide, which is in multifamily housing is pretty reasonable, and only has a 4-story building on either side of it, 3 stories at the south end. And it faces due south. So I get some of the comments about solar access, but this courtyard will be full of light, admittedly not all day, because it's almost impossible in multifamily housing to get a courtyard all day, but it is actually fairly light. And the lower units with only a building 40 feet, it's almost a one-to-one plane into those units, which is actually pretty reasonable for solar access. So we have actually thought about that. The double loaded corridor, unfortunately, is just one of those things we have to live with. We could try and do some longer, thinner units or lose some units, but I don't think my client's going to let us lose any units, because this project, because of the hillside and the other requirements, is going to be a pretty tough deal to make work anyway. And they are the bane of our existence to some degree, but they're not very long in the scheme of things, and we can get light on either end. And we've got this sort of gap to the street in the building, which will sort of allow breeze to go through. The idea of plazas is a great one, but this is a private courtyard. I mean, we have to have security for the residents. And so the idea of the big steps at the front, it's where someone could buy a coffee and just go and hang up out on the steps with their laptop. And I think it was Will said that maybe they're steep and not a very nice. I mean, the idea is we need to get into the full design of them, that they would be 18-inch treads and would have planting integrated in them, and maybe some patterning with tile and things like that. So it's certainly intended to be a really nice place to hang out. And I think Jacqueline explained, we are set back at the front more than is required. And we do have a really quite nice open space for someone to sit on. And the hatched lines all around the building, including on the left, are easements. So we can't build on those lines. So we can't splay the building any more than it already is. That would have been a really nice idea. And we always like trying to do that. And we looked at it, but we can't really build in that area. So there are a lot of constraints on this site that we've thought about. We'll take your comments about Spanish style, and I really appreciate the nice words, Camille, and that you took the time to go on the website. We have done true Spanish style buildings. We thought here that we would try not to compete with City Hall with a pastiche Spanish style on a 5-story building. I mean, we all see them around town, and that's hard. But I like Will's comments about maybe making the ground floor at the front a little bit more traditional. We could certainly add some arches. We could certainly add some tile, and make it as grounded in the Calabasas style as we possibly can along that front pedestrian experience. So I think those were, we do have cross sections actually that we can forward to you with the adjacent buildings in. And I think that was a miss on our part. We should have included them in this package for you. So we can certainly get those to you. And they do actually show with the hotel and the office building that, other than City Hall, the height-wise is pretty similar to 2 of the 3 surrounding buildings. And we'll continue to look, facing City Hall, we did set back 14 feet more than the code required. There's no sidewalk on that side because we are going to have, parking and parking entrance and loading. So we decided early on it was better to create 2 safe crosswalks to the City Hall side of the road for pedestrian access. And one thing we didn't talk about across the front of the building, as well as all the landscaping and the new trees, there will be 4 really nice light standards, which will not only give security, but a more traditional and will provide that sort of sense of Calabasas in their design as well. Those are my thoughts.
Thank you, Jonathan. So I think for your cross sections, one of the things that you have to do is your whole package that will go to us is also a package that will go to the Planning Commission. And so things like larger cross sections, things like renderings that are set back that show a little more context to the other buildings, things that you've done a million times and could include, will help you to sell it at that level, because ultimately that's where you have to do the real pitch. That's the decision. So the more graphic information that you can provide about the proposal at that scale, at that city making scale, what I'll call it, I think the better you are off in terms of explaining how this building fits into the context in the ways that you think it is appropriate. So we'd like them to talk to you about design, but ultimately you're going to need them to sell it. So just keep that. And I tell that to almost all the applicants, do more in the visualization, because not everybody can read a plan and a section and understand things of that nature, but most people can dig on good renderings that you obviously clearly skillful at, and even, dare I say it, a tiny little animation, which is real time. So these are all tools that I know you probably are familiar with, and I would just encourage you to expand on the argument, broaden the borders of your context to fit this, to allow your design iteration to fit the comments that we've made and into the context of this little downtown area.
Thank you. We will do.
Jacqueline or Michael, clearly this is going to come back. So, or it should come back, I believe. So is it enough to say that we should continue the review of this proposal, at which time the applicant's ready to resubmit? Or what is it that we actually need to do?
You do have to make a formal motion, and it's clear that that motion would be to continue it and for the applicant to take into consideration the comments that were made. The one thing that the panel could consider is if they want to have one member of the panel to maybe dialogue with the applicant as they address some of these questions or the comments by the panel, so that they have some feedback as if they're going in the right direction. Again, it's just a suggestion. It's not a requirement. Typically, they would just take the comments, make whatever changes they, that they see that they can make, and then bring it back to the panel. But if there's a desire to have a member of the panel to work with the applicant, to give them better, give them good direction, then that could be an option to the panel as well.
Okay, and it's my opinion that broad strokes, they need to do what they can and bring it back to the whole panel. And then specifically, if there's tweaks that need to still happen, then we can associate someone to help them get across the finish line. But I think we let them go back and address in mass the comments that we've mentioned.
I think what Michael may have been mentioning, Will, if this is something that you'd be on board with, is that, before they come back to the panel a second time, have a member of the panel to kind of look at those changes with them before it comes back a second time. That way they know that they're ready to go back a second time.
Or at least in the right direction.
Right.
Well, the right direction is somewhat subjective, and I think that the nature of this panel is to allow multiple voices the same chance to make comments based on what they've reviewed and seen. So I think that for this project, it might happen later, but at this stage, I don't, any other panelists can comment on it, but I don't know that that's appropriate quite yet.
Yeah, again, just a suggestion. Otherwise it's, you could just make the motion to continue it, and then they'll come back at, when they're when they've been able to incorporate the changes.
Okay, so why don't we dialogue a little bit about the 4 or 5 recommended directions that we're going to give them to then be continued for the next application. So Jeff, and you said you wrote some things down.
Yeah, the main one that I've heard so far, I think from all of you, is to consider reevaluating the architectural style to incorporate more Spanish elements and more of a Calabasas, more of a style that's consistent with other buildings in the Park Center master plan area. I think that's one that all 5 of you had mentioned. I heard a couple things about considering tile at the roof level, or at least incorporating tile at the front and side facade somewhere. And then not sure how to word this one, but consider parking options. I don't know how you want to word that so that it's a design recommendation. Consider design, consider potential ideas for parking incorporated in the existing design, something like that. So we have Spanish architectural style, tile, parking. Do you want to add the one about the courtyard?
No, I think we want to, let's reclassify these. I think the first one should be that they reconsider the massings and articulation along the facades of Park Sorrento and the facade facing City Hall.
Okay.
That's that first sort of city making notion.
Well,
Sorry,
can I
so that
jump
was
in?
yeah,
Of
go ahead.
course.
Can I jump in? Yeah, because I think, you know, Alan said it was a miss on what works for our city. I don't think we should start saying, take this building. I mean, we're not at the level of detail to add a tile detail onto this building. We're not at the point, you know, it's just the massing of this building and its disrespect to the adjacent building has to be dealt with first. I don't think we should be, these are incredibly talented architects. We only need to tell them that, you know, maybe you don't live in the city, hang out at City Hall a while, go to some of the residents nearby, get to know the spirit of the city. I absolutely am. I don't think we have to tell someone they have to do a Spanish Mediterranean building. I think there's many, as I said, buildings on their website that could sit here that are modern even, that solve the, I mean, it would be easy to just say, put the colonial build, you know, Spanish colonial, whatever, revival building here. And that would be great. And I think the community would appreciate that. But if it can't achieve their goals because of how dense it has to be, which is hard to do, I think they have real work to do first. I wouldn't be applying details to it yet. It's not ready. It needs to speak to City Hall. In my mind, it's like, I don't know why. I mean, it needs to have circulation that way. You know, I'm just not sure this format, the way it is set up is as though it's a city building in a row. You know, that's not what it is. So, and I think, again, Jonathan, and I apologize to jump back on this one, when you hear the little things that come out of our mouths, it's all off the top of our head. When Will said about, you know, the hill in the back, we're not studying it for you. We're saying, think outside the box. There might be another place to put the pool. There might be a way to incorporate parking other than a perimeter, you know, apartment building up against the wall kind of thing. That's all those are. Don't take our comments as please incorporate this item. We aren't looking at the setbacks. We're not, you know, we're just getting a glance at it, you know, an hour before we jump on. But you guys are so talented. I think we should hold back that level.
Camille, I agree with you. We need to be specific just because of the nature of this panel but those specific comments could be very general in nature. They don't have to be hang tile on it, you know, change.
Yeah, it's too early.
No, I agree. So, but we want to give them some direction of the summary of this meeting, which is, like Alan said, it doesn't fit, it's a miss. But how do we say that in a way that allows them to move forward? It's a miss. Why? It's a miss because it doesn't fit the language of our downtown. Yes, no. It's a miss because there's maybe some city making gestures that might offer something back to the community. You know, it's a miss for whatever those broad strokes might be, so that we give the designers the biggest opportunity to think outside the box at this stage. Because I don't think we want to see this building back with a couple different little things on it, some doodads here and there and some pastiche. No, we kind of want some rethinking, if I'm not incorrect in my assumption.
I agree.
Okay. So help me formalize that into a precise statement, just so that we can let them go do that.
I think what you said was good. If anyone was typing, it was great commentary. I mean, it's town making, that's it, city making, you know. It's all those things. The proportion of the building, you know, it looks a little more office building like than the one across the street. The one across the street doesn't even look like an office building, you know. So, you know, it's understanding the city and how different we are and why people come here and why the, you know, real estate is what it is. And all those things are things we're trying to keep the value of the community. And again, I'm not saying it's because we have to be traditional. I want the architects to make that choice, you know. But we've tried to, you know, that one complex across the street, we tried to say, okay, you can be modern, you know, let's do this. And we ended up back with a box with some Spanish trim left on it. And I just wouldn't want to see that happen to this building. I think it's an amazing opportunity. It's a great site. It will be beautiful to have higher density housing available, you know, so many good things.
Okay, Alan, were you going to mention something?
No, I think you guys hit it on the nose. I would just ask the architecture firm to kind of fit the program of the city and the location. in which we'll
Calabasas
place it.
Architecture Review Board.
Cool.
Yeah, they're.
Oh.
It's the,
I think you're
they're
not muted unless you're trying to speak.
Alan, this is Alan. I was, but I don't know somebody else.
Sorry, I think that was Scott in there. Sorry, Alan.
No, no problem. I just said that I think the architecture firm, if they can go back and just kind of try and fit the program of the location of where it is in the city and the street and the buildings around it to kind of complement it rather than fight against it.
Okay, so Jacqueline, where are we? We want to give them as precise of a statement as we can. That's general enough to give them the latitude to come back with a reconsidered project.
Exactly. We need a sentence for your recommendation.
One sentence.
Can be a couple, but yeah, a specific general recommendation. And I think Alan had a lot of good language in what he just said, if we want to incorporate that.
Okay, so then something to the effect of, we recommend that the applicant reconsider the elements of design related to city context, articulation of massing, language of form, and inclusion of city benefit amenities in the redesign of the project.
Sorry, that was good, but I don't write that fast. So we have panel recommends applicant reconsider elements of design in regards to city context, massing, and then
language of form, so the Spanish, the Mediterranean.
Okay.
You might just say architectural expression of architectural language.
Okay.
I think there should be something there. I mean, this whole big, you know, because it faces City Hall. I understand if this was downtown in Santa Monica or Culver City, we've all put those kind of buildings there, but this facade length being just this flat facade, I mean, I think it needs to, I know there's indentions and there are cutaway windows, but the windows don't have much depth to them. And most of the windows here in Calabasas, we try to encourage people to feel the mass of the building, the thickness of the building. And I think it needs to have articulations. I think it was, I looked at, again, that was the 1650 Lincoln project. I think it told a story about what was inside. It wasn't just holes pushed in. to make a balcony, it was the balcony had different materiality than the rest of it. So there was a texture of materials that were telling the story of what's happening inside instead of this big flat, that everyone from Civic Center side is looking at. So I think the articulation of the building is important. Telling
So
the story.
put that as a clause right after the last thing we
Okay.
wrote down.
Articulation and materiality of eastern facade facing City Hall.
Yeah.
Of all facades.
Do you
All
want to say something?
facades.
Do you want to say something specific about the City Hall facing facade, Camille, or do you just want to leave it as?
Well, I do think it's all facades, but that is an important elevation. So all I would say is the front has some articulate, yes, you can look at it. Can't tell where the front door is, but you can look at it and know where the coffee shop is. And you can look at it, know where people live and sleep. But I think on the other side, it's honestly can be solved with the materials, but ideally it's solved with volume, negative and positive space that's readable, not just punched,
So we have
I don't know. Will is
articulation.
better with words than me. I'm going to tell you, my whole body needs to draw, and I'm not allowed to. So I'm out of words. Will, you go for it.
Well, I just think it's from my early talk. It's this side, right? And it's this side.
It is.
It's these two, this Park Sorrento, and it's the LA, if you will, between the City Hall and the proposed building.
Yeah,
And that's what it should be.
Incorporate that somehow, since those are the two sides that you focused on the most. So if I say articulation and materiality of all facades, but particularly the street facing and City Hall facing facades.
I think that's a start. Again, as been mentioned, these guys are talented. So I'm sure they can cook up a great solution that would satisfy these things.
Also, this meeting is recorded, so they'll be able to go back and hear all what these comments are.
Okay. Yeah, I don't really want to get into the weeds on their internal building circulation in terms of number of elevators, access to ADA spaces, all of those things. But as architects, I mean, that's part and parcel of the things we're talking about. So let's leave it off for now because that's an internal building thing.
Okay.
So Jacqueline, could you read back to us the statement?
The panel recommends that the applicant reconsider elements of the design in regards to the city context, massing, expression of architectural language, and the articulation and materiality of all facades, but particularly those facing City Hall and the public right-of-way. And then
Okay, I like that.
all of your individual more specific comments as well, again, since the meeting is being recorded. But as far as a general recommendation goes, is that okay?
Do we have
I
a
think you have
motion?
to add back Will's request for the larger sections. And I know it was mentioned that they exist somewhere and we just didn't get to see them. But we have to see the adjacent buildings in the section. That's something we ask for always, even on homes when we're reviewing them, so we can understand, with that, we don't have the kind of time as volunteers to go look through and check all the heights, and do the sight lines. You do it for us, put it in front of us, and then it's easy to get it approved.
Okay, I'll provide cross sections throughout the master plan area. So through City Hall, Hilton Garden Inn Hotel, and the office buildings across the street as a separate sentence.
Right.
Okay, is there a motion to recommend with that statement that we continue this application?
Motion to recommend with the statement just stated.
I second that.
Fine, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, the motion carries. Then we will continue this until another day. Jonathan, Scott, we appreciate your patient patient commentary and your expert abilities, and we really truly look forward to a better building the next time we see this. And we know you're up to par on this.
And before you adjourn the meeting, I just want to make sure that everyone, the public is aware that the next time the ARP meets, it will be in person. So just want to make sure that's out there as well.
Thank you, Michael. Okay. Unless there's anything else we need to discuss, I'd like to adjourn the meeting. Hearing nothing, I will say meeting adjourned and everybody have a nice weekend.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Stay dry.
Thanks, Will.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.